Hopscotch by Julio Cortázar. Hopscotch, Spanish, Rayuela is a novel by Argentine writer Julio Cortázar. Written in Paris. It was published in Spanish in 1963. And in English in 1966. Hopscotch is a stream of consciousness novel, which can be read according to two different sequences of chapters. This novel is often referred to as a counter-novel, as it was by Cortázar himself. It meant an exploration with multiple endings, a never-ending search through unanswerable questions. Written in an episodic, snapshot manner, the novel has 155 chapters, the last 99 designated as expendable. Some of these expendable chapters fill in gaps that occur in the main storyline, while others add information about the characters or record the aesthetic or literary speculations of a writer named Morelli, who makes a brief appearance in the narrative. Some of the expendable chapters at first seem like random musings, but upon closer inspection solve questions that arise during the reading of the first two parts of the book. Characters. The main character, Horatio Oliveira, is a well-read and loquacious bohemian. He enjoys a mostly intellectual participation in life, as is characterized by his general passivity towards his environment, and appears to be obsessed with attaining what is referred to as a unifying conception of life, or center in which he can contentedly exist. La Maga, a nickname, as her real name is Lucia, is a beguiling, intelligent being whose love of life and spontaneous nature challenge Horatio's ego as well as his assumptions about life. Oliveira's lover in Paris, she is lively, an active participant in her own adventures, and a stark contrast to Horatio's other friends, with whom he has formed a philosophical social circle called the Serpent Club. She eventually develops into an indispensable muse for Horatio, and a lens he employs to examine himself and the world in a more three-dimensional manner. La Maga also has an infant son, Rocamadour, whose appearance in France causes a crisis in the relationship between Lucia and Oliveira. Apart from Horatio and La Maga, the other members of the Serpent Club include Osip Gregorovius, who is presented as a rival for Lucia's affections, the artists Perico Romero and Etienne's friend Guimeno, Wang, and Ronald and Babs, who are married. The club meets either in La Maga's apartment or the flat Ronald and Babs share. When Horatio returns to Argentina, he is greeted by his old friend Manolo, nicknamed Traveler, and his wife, Delita. The two are employed at a circus and seem to enjoy a mostly serene existence. Delita bears a striking similarity to Horatio's great love interest, La Maga, while Traveler is referred to as his doppelganger. The relationship that develops between the three centers around Oliveira's interest in Delita, which seems disingenuous, and Traveler's attempts to lessen Horatio's metaphysical burden. Oliveira desires to inhabit Traveler's life, while Traveler appears to be mostly concerned with his friend's deteriorating mental health. Other major characters include Pola, another Parisian love interest of Horatio's, who is diagnosed with breast cancer after being cursed by La Maga, Gekrepten, Horatio's lover in Argentina, and Morelli, an Italian writer much discussed by the Serpent Club. Minor characters of note include Madame Bertha Trepat, a composer who mistakes Horatio's attention for sexual interest, and a homeless woman named Emmanuelle with whom Oliveira has a brief, disastrous tryst with shortly after La Maga's disappearance. Plot summary. Plot. Chapters 1 to 36. The first 36 chapters of the novel in numerical order are grouped under the heading From the Other Side. They provide an account of the life of Horatio Oliveira, an Argentine intellectual. He experiences life in Paris in the 1950s. The other characters consist of La Maga and a band of bohemian intellectuals who call themselves the Serpent Club. The story opens with Horatio searching the bridges of Paris for La Maga, who has disappeared. The story progresses in a non-linear order. Scenes with the Serpent Club, which convenes in the evening to drink, listen to jazz music, and engage in arguments about art and life, alternate with descriptions of Horatio's walks alone through the city. La Maga disappears. Horatio and his friend Etienne visit an old man whom Horatio had witnessed being struck by a car on one of his solitary walks. He turns out to be Morelli, an iconoclastic writer and literary critic much beloved of the Serpent Club. That night, the club goes to Morelli's flat to assemble his new work, a novel that can be read in any order. There, a member of the club, Babs, attacks Horatio for what he did to La Maga. The club disbands. Horatio retreats to a bridge, where he meets a homeless woman, Emmanuelle, The police arrest Emmanuel and Horatio for lewd behavior. Plot, chapters 37 to 56. Chapters 37 to 56 are collected under the heading From This Side. And the action takes place in Argentina. It opens with a brief introduction to the life of Manolo Traveler. Horatio Oliveira's friend from childhood, who lives in Buenos Aires with his wife Talita. Although Traveler is restless, the marriage appears to be on solid ground until Gekrypton, Horatio's old Argentinian lover, informs him that Horatio is due to arrive by boat. The news fills Traveler with a dark sense of foreboding, nonetheless. He and Talita greet Horatio at the docks, where Oliveira momentarily mistakes Talita for La Amiga. Horatio then settles with Gekrypton in a hotel room located directly across the street from the flat Traveler and Talita share, where his mind slowly begins to unravel. Traveler and Talita work for a circus, and when Horatio's temporary employment falls through, Traveler arranges for his old friend to be hired on there as well, though not without misgivings. Oliveira's presence has begun to disturb him, but he is unable to determine why. He wishes to ascribe it to Horatio's flirtations with Talita, but cannot do so, as there seems to be something more going on. And anyway, he has no doubts about his wife's remaining faithful to him. Unable to decipher the mystery, and unable to tell Horatio to leave them alone, he begins to sleep less and less, and his sense of restlessness increases. Horatio, meanwhile, observing the relationship between Traveler and Talita, who more and more reminds him of La Amiga, endeavors to enter more intimately into their lives. But he is unable to do so. His frustrations increase, and he begins to show signs of impending mental breakdown. One hot afternoon, he spends hours on the floor trying to straighten nails, although he has no particular use in mind for them. He then convinces Traveler and Talita to help him build a makeshift bridge between the windows of the two buildings over which Talita can cross. Traveler indulges his friend's eccentric behavior, but Talita is frightened and must be prodded into participating. She feels it is a test of some sort. In the end, Talita does not cross between the buildings. Soon after this incident, the owner of the circus sells the operation to a Brazilian businessman and invests in a local mental institution. Traveler, Talita and Horatio decide to go to work there despite the irony of the situation, or perhaps because of it. Horatio jests that the patients in the hospital will be no more mad than the three of them, anyway. On the day the ownership of the hospital is to be transferred, they are told that all the inmates must agree to the deal by signing a document, and that the three of them must act as witnesses. They meet a good-natured orderly named Remorino as well as a Dr. Ovejero, who manages the facility. The former owner of the circus and his wife, Cuca, are also present. One by one the inmates are led in to sign the document, a procedure that lasts well into the night. Talita becomes the resident pharmacist at the hospital, while Horatio and Traveler act as either orderlies or guards at night. The place is dark and eerie in the long hours before dawn, with the three often seeking refuge in alcohol and conversation in the pharmacy's warmer atmosphere. Remorino shows Horatio and Traveler the basement, where dead bodies are kept and cold beer can be had. One night Horatio is smoking in his room when he sees Talita crossing the moonlit garden below, apparently heading to bed. A moment later, he thinks he sees La Amiga appear and begin a game of hopscotch in the same general area, but when she looks up at him, he realizes it is Talita, who had turned and recrossed the garden. A kind of guilt, fed in part by the institution's gloomy atmosphere, begins to steal into his musings. And it is not long before he conceives of the idea of someone's trying to murder him while he is on duty, perhaps Traveler. Later in the night, while Oliveira is on the second floor pondering over the symbolic implications of the mental institution's elevator, Talita approaches and the two talk about holes, passages, pits, and La Amiga. Of course, and as they do, the elevator comes to life, ascending from the basement. One of the mental patients is inside. After sending the man back to his room, Horatio and Talita decide to go down, ostensibly to see what he was up to. Alone with Talita and the dead bodies, Horatio finds himself talking to her not as if she reminded him of La Amiga, but as if she were La Amiga. In a final moment of desperation, he attempts to kiss this Talita La Amiga mixture, but is repelled. Returning to her room, Talita tells Traveler about it, who surmises that something may be seriously wrong with his friend. Meanwhile, having retreated to his own room, Horatio is now convinced that Traveler is coming to kill him. He begins to construct a kind of defense line in the dark room that is intended to confuse and irritate an attack, rather than deter it. Water-filled basins placed on the floor, for example, as well as threads tied to heavy objects, which are in turn tied to the doorknob. Horatio then sits in the dark on the opposite side of the room, near the window, waiting to see what will happen. The hours pass slowly and painfully. But finally Traveler does try to come in, and the tumult that results brings Dr. O'Hara and the others out into the garden, where they find Olivera leaning out the window of his room as if intending to let himself fall. Traveler tries to talk Horatio out of doing what he, for his part, insists he doesn't intend to do, though at the conclusion of this part of the book, he suddenly muses that maybe he does mean to do such a thing after all, that maybe it is for the best, and the end of the passage is wholly open to this interpretation. Only by proceeding to read the expendable chapters will the reader be able to place Horatio firmly back inside mental institution, where, after being sedated by O'Hara, he succumbs to a lengthy delirium. The expendable chapters. The third section of the book, under the heading From Diverse Sides, does not need to be read in order to understand the plot. But it does contain solutions to certain puzzles that arise during the perusal of the first two parts. For example, the reader finds out a great deal more about the mysterious Morelli, as well as finding out how Lamaga and Emmanuel first became acquainted. Through Morelli's writings, Cortázar hints at some of the motives behind the actual construction of Hopscotch, such as a desire to write a work in which the reader is a true co-conspirator. The inner workings of Horatio Olivera himself are described in a much less evasive manner than in any previous chapters, as well. The section, and the book, ends with Horatio visiting Morelli in the hospital, who asks him to go to his apartment and organize his notebooks while he is away. Most of these notebooks are unpublished, and Olivera not only considers doing this work as a great honor to himself personally, but also as perhaps the best chance yet of his attaining the 9 square in his lifelong game of spiritual, emotional, and metaphysical hopscotch. End of the summary. Thank you.